Tristan und Isolde by Richard Wagner. A review by Louis Hillenbrand. Tristan und Isolde is one of the major operas written by German composer Richard Wagner. It is based on the medieval legend of Tristan and Isolde, as told by Gottfried von Strassburg. The original libretto was written by Wagner himself, as was his trademark with all of his works. It was first performed in 1865 and was an immense success for both its groundbreaking score and the thematic depth of the libretto, on which in particular we will be focusing for this review. It is a colossal masterpiece in art history that has ignited passion and turmoil not only among the composer's contemporaries, but up until this very day as well. I consider it to be one of my favorite operas and works of art in general, as it had a drastic impact on me when I discovered it as a teenager. It was as a young man also that Friedrich Nietzsche listened to the opera for the first time, at the same time as his adoration for Wagner. And even after he distanced himself from him, Nietzsche still had this to say about the opera. Even now I am still in search of a work which exercises such a dangerous fascination, such a spine-tingling and blissful infinity as Tristan. I have sought in vain in every art. It is one of Wagner's simplest but also deepest works for the stage. It is the traditional story of Tristan vanquishing Ireland's champion Morold and winning the hand of Isolde the Fair for his uncle, King Mark of Cornwall. On their way to Cornwall, Isolde cannot bring herself to live through the shame of marrying the uncle of her husband's slayer, with whom she had a brief encounter after the battle, not knowing it was he who had thus shattered her life. She then asks her maid Brangäne to prepare a deadly draught for both she and Tristan to drink. In loyalty to her mistress, however, Brangäne substitutes the poison for a love potion that makes the two fall in love with one another as they arrive in Cornwall. There, they can only meet under the cover of night to express their love for one another in a long and sublime love duet until they are discovered by King Mark, alerted by Melot. After the king gives a long, mournful monologue, Tristan challenges Melot in a duel in which he lets himself be gravely wounded. Later on, Tristan is transported to his land of Cariol, where he yearns for his beloved. It is only after the pain of his wound takes a toll on Tristan that Isolde finally reaches shore for her beloved to die in her arms before she begins the final aria of the opera and dies by his side. The story of Tristan und Isolde is one of sheer abandonment to the bliss of passion that was inspired by Wagner's own experience with forbidden love. Throughout his life, Wagner was almost constantly on the go from financial problems. He lived a life of excess and luxury, having a particular liking for expensive silk, which contributed to his being on the move across Western Europe for many years. That is, until he fell under the patronage of the young King Ludwig II of Bavaria, who, like Nietzsche, adored the composer as part of his life of extravagant visions of castles and romanticism. In 1849, Wagner was forced to flee Dresden to Zurich. There was a warrant for his arrest after he had participated in the unsuccessful May Revolution, one of many uprisings taking place across Europe at the time. In 1852 in Zurich, he met the wealthy silk merchant Otto Wesendonck, who was a great admirer of his music. Soon after, Wesendonck decided to support Wagner financially and even allowed him to stay at a cottage on his estate. It was there, in spite of being married to actress Mina Planer, that Wagner began a passionate and secret liaison with his benefactor's wife, Mathilde Wesendonck. She was an educated woman who enjoyed writing poems, 5 of which Wagner set to music in his Wesendonck-Lieder, composed between 1857 and 1858. It was partly the sheer passion of this forbidden love, coupled with the growing interest in the German-speaking world for medieval poems such as the Nibelungen Lied, Parsifal, and Gottfried von Strassburg's rendition of Tristan and Isolde, that inspired Wagner for his monumental operas. When one studies the libretto of the opera, one also sees the great influence of the thought of philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, whom Wagner read extensively. The way the two lovers expressed their desire to live an eternal night of love through death echoes Schopenhauer's vision of the world as an endless struggle of conflicting wills. According to him, the only escape was to be found in renouncement and death, which in turn is very much influenced by the Buddhist spiritual precepts with which he became acquainted. In the first act of the opera, the lovers are bound to the ways of the world, whereas in the second act, at night, is when they can let their love speak freely before they are discovered. In the third act is when the ultimate renouncement of the world takes place, as the lovers died together. Tristan und Isolde is not only a perfect synthesis of the thought of Schopenhauer, but also one of the early works of the symbolist movement of the second half of the 19th century, arguably the first for the stage. In the libretto, day is described as representing the sufferings of the world as well as deceit and disappointment. Night, on the other hand, represents solace, liberation, and love, which is why the lovers desire to spend an eternal night of love and death together, since their passion cannot survive the light of day. One recent staging that I personally highly appreciate and find represents this thematic progression exquisitely is Heiner Müller's production at the Bayreuth Festival of 1995. Each act has its dominant color pattern representing the libretto's themes and emotions and keeping with its symbolist genius. As a matter of fact, Wagner's music was very much appreciated by symbolist authors in France, including Charles Baudelaire and Auguste Villiers de l'Isle-Adam. At its core, symbolist literature does express a desire to lose oneself in the delight of imagination and beauty in the face of the difficulties of reality. In spite of this desire for abandonment that we see throughout the libretto, there is also the presence of asserting life in the third act, when suffering threatens Tristan's desire. At one key moment, when a fiddle song reminds Tristan of his parents' death and makes him wonder whether he is destined, like them, to yearn and die, he is quick to assert that he must rather yearn even in death than yearn to die. This, in my opinion, is a conscious desire close to the Nietzschean will to power, rather than surrendering to despair and renunciation. The expression of emotions coming from the nightly realm, untouched by the light of day, from the unconscious and secret desires, also predates Freudian and Jungian investigations into the depths of the mind. In an artistic era that was divided between the raptures of imagination and social changes pointing to material necessities, it marks the beginning of the great interest in the human soul, its intrinsic value, its relation to others, and the assertion of its will to create, rather than a submission to any prevailing dogma or pure materialism, all of which makes this opera ahead of its time and a peak of artistic genius in European culture, a work that gathered an entire continent in eagerness for the music and thought of the future that Wagner brought to the stage. In conclusion, Richard Wagner's Tristan und Isolde is a prophetic work that summarized Schopenhauer's philosophy and the zeitgeist of the 19th century. It also helped shape the symbolist movement of the following decades, as well as the Nietzschean approach to the Dionysian side of the human mind and spirit, which would later be investigated by psychoanalysis. It speaks of love and of melting away in ecstasy, and its daring themes impacted Western culture for many decades to come. Because it is a work that influenced me and my vision of love so much during my teenage years, I can only hope that its suave music might find a new home in the hearts of new listeners, so that its breath of love and passion can endure forevermore. Thank you for watching. If you liked what you saw, please feel free to comment below to tell me your thoughts, give this video a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel for more similar content. I wish you all a wonderful day and hope to hear from you soon.